Hey guys, real pleasure to have Evengalos Simoudis from Synapse Partners. He's an investor who invests in a lot in artificial intelligence. Before that, he was at Trident and at Apex Partners. But really the main reason for the call today is his new book, Transportation Transformation. We're going to talk a lot about how the pandemic, and even before that, how trends in mobility, autonomous vehicles, and so on, that he researched for the book. So Evengalos, thank you for taking the time. Come on board. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your background and Synapse, and then we'll go into the book.
Vinnie, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure working and talking with you. I always learn something, so I look forward to our conversation. I've been in Silicon Valley for the past 30 years. Initially, I came and did a couple of startups, and in between the startups, I was a corporate executive at IBM. Since 2000, after selling my second startup, I came in the venture profession, as you said, initially with Apex, then later Trident, and for the past 4.5 years, I have my own firm called Synapse Partners. The common thread in all of my career, I would say, has been data and AI. I've been working in AI since 1982. And particularly with Synapse, we've decided to focus exclusively on early stage startups that develop enterprise software AI applications. And in order to better understand what are the problems that we should be investing behind, we started forming very productive, very unique partnerships with corporations from 3 industries: automotive and by extension transportation, financial services, and telco. And today, we both advise these corporations that are in our network on every aspect of data and AI strategy, as well as obviously continue to invest in startups that, as I said, address problems, both sometimes horizontal problems, sometimes vertical specific to these 3 industries.
And, so like you say, AI since 1982, you got a PhD in computer science and machine learning from Brandeis University. So your academic credentials are also pretty impressive. And before that, you were at Caltech. So you're definitely what people would call a geek, a very knowledgeable geek. So Evengalos, we've been seeing amazing heroics, right? I mean, if you leave out the doom and gloom and the negative media, there's been a lot of amazing heroics, right? If you look at last mile delivery, all the logistics innovations, if you look at auto companies jumping in trying to make ventilators, if you look at all the therapies that have been introduced in the last 2-3 months, if you look at how hospitals have learned to turn ordinary rooms into ICUs in a couple of days, I mean, it's just been a remarkable phase for innovation and energy, right? Talk about the transportation sector. That seems more uneven, but you've done a lot of research on for your book. Let's talk about some of the heroics you've seen in transportation, or mobility, as you proudly call it.
Yeah. So first of all, as I say in the book, when we look at transportation, we don't only look at passenger mobility, but we also look at goods delivery. And the way that I approach transportation is by looking at 3 constituencies, which I think are particularly crucial in urban transportation, which is the focus of the book. So this is the cities, the automakers, and the mobility services companies. Mobility services, both for, as I said, for passenger transportation as well as goods delivery. So if you look at cities, first of all, their public transportation systems have been severely impacted by the pandemic. There is the aspect that they have to protect their riders, but they also have to continue providing capability, transportation, because there are people who cannot afford to have their own vehicle and they need to go to work, either because they're essential workers or because they need to to do that. So transport, as though these changes have been happening in the cities, the cities had to not only provide the transportation at some level, but also start thinking about new sources of revenue, because with reduced movement, they have reduced revenues from parking. We have reduced revenues from tolls and even parking violations. So cities are very, in their case, the heroics, I think, are coming in two ways. First, in continuing to serve their public, and second, in starting to think out of the box on how to generate new sources of revenue, which I think are going to be, they're going to accelerate this transformation of the city. On the automaker side, the heroics have come in two ways. First and foremost, obviously, in order to keep the plants going, they had to create new approaches for safe environments so that they can continue the production. And we have a number of OEMs and automakers and tier one suppliers now corporate that are corporate partners of my firm. And you can see how their plans are opening up in the various geographies as they apply this, as you call them, heroics. The other thing which automakers are obviously doing a lot of is in digitalizing. And the pandemic is actually accelerating to a tremendous extent this digitalization in order to provide contactless purchase experience. So right now, I would say that we're probably at the 90th percentile of being able to offer that experience. The Tesla's customer journey is obviously influencing many of these decisions. So that's what on the automaker side. And then on the mobility services companies, they had to very quickly shift from passenger transportation, which has gone down dramatically, to goods delivery. And that required a rethinking of how they assign routes, how they identify, how they match drivers with what needs to be transported. And also the other heroic that they had to do because of the pandemic, they had to make sure that there's a good balance between drivers and riders, right? So the demand and supply had to be rethought. So these three constituencies, I consider them to be extremely active in creating these new strategies that some of which I think will remain with us way beyond the pandemic.
You know, Evangelos, so I've interviewed a couple of tier one suppliers, CIOs. I interviewed the CIO of Delta Airlines. So I've been getting a little bit of the action in different sectors. But it seems like, William Gibson wrote 30 years ago, he said, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. In the mobility sector, transportation sector, it seems really clear, right? So you've got electrical vehicles seem extremely hot. Recreational vehicles seem hot. Bikes are hot. On the other hand, you look at cruise lines, you look at airlines, you look at even cars, ride sharing. Mm-hmm. It's like if you had, I don't know if you could have predicted, if you had asked me a year ago what happens in a recession, I would not have predicted that stark a difference. So, tell us what you've seen and why in particular are some sectors like EVs so hot?
So electric vehicles is actually a very interesting case in point, and there is a regulation, there is economics, and then there is kind of like technology, right? So one of the reasons that electric vehicles in particular are becoming they're coming to the fore of thinking of many automakers and their suppliers is because of regulation. I mean, the European Union in particular requires much lower emissions, so that will require moving away from strictly internal combustion engine based vehicles. On the technology front, we're seeing that the battery technology is making very significant improvements. And that takes away the range anxiety that both consumers have felt, but also logistics companies have felt. So you're starting to see now logistics companies placing significant orders for both vans as well as long-haul trucks that have electric propulsion. The next point is that I think everybody starting in the automotive industry in particular is starting to realize that the vehicle architectures that we have been using to date are showing their age, and it's very important to create new architectures, the so-called software-defined vehicle architecture. So now you have companies, and again, Tesla was the first one that showed the advantages of having a new vehicle architecture. So you're starting now to see a lot of work in that area, and that will, the software-defined vehicle will improve the total cost of ownership, will improve the manufacturing efficiency because the vehicles have fewer parts, electric vehicles have fewer parts. It will also improve the personalization of the vehicle. And I think some of the things that Tesla has shown us to date, it's just the beginning. We're involved with several of our corporate partners in defining such architectures, helping them define such architectures, particularly from the data and AI perspective, because data is going to be a very big ingredient in this transformation. So I think all of these come together in creating that strong interest, both from the OEM, obviously, as well as from the users, the consumers, be it consumers or corporations that use such vehicles.
It almost seems like, and you've clearly done a lot of research, almost seems like EVs are a lot hotter than autonomous vehicles now. And it also seems like governments are not going to have as much funds. EVs are going to require a lot of infrastructure investment in sensors and so on. What are we going to see a delay in autonomous vehicles becoming reality? I read that Tokyo is thinking of bringing out flying cars before AVs. So give us your perspective on where AVs are, and did the pandemic change their trajectory at all?
So I will start by saying that even before I wrote my first book I published it back in 2017, and as early as then, around that time, we had the excitement about autonomous vehicles was probably nearing its peak. And I was saying that our projections for when these vehicles are going to be introduced in the use cases that were being discussed are way off. In other words, they're way too optimistic. I maintain, in all my talks and all of the interactions that I've had, I've maintained that we need to be much more circumspect, and we need to think about use cases as opposed to just making blanket statements as we've been doing. The robotaxi use case, which has taken most of our attention and most of the popularity in the press and media, is probably one of the hardest use cases to deliver. So I think many of the corporations and startups that became involved in autonomous vehicles, they have come to realize that it's a very expensive proposition, and B, even if you're willing to invest the capital, it's a very difficult proposition to satisfy. So in this new book, I devote an entire chapter in talking about the various use cases where autonomous vehicles will be applied and where we are with regards to adoption. And I would say even we've been working recently with two Asian automakers that are corporate partners of the firm, and we've created for them a map of all the use cases, be it for consumer mobility, for corporate logistics, as well as for city services. And I've been very surprised to see the breadth of cases, right? So with that backdrop, I think as I said, many of the corporations that have been involved in the recent past in autonomous vehicles have realized that the size of the investments and the problems that they need to overcome are such that when you stack them with some of the other issues they have to address, such as electric vehicles, for example, the priority starts to decrease. I don't believe that the companies that have been serious about autonomous vehicles are going to slow down. I think they will continue investing and working at the pace that they have been working. But I also believe that we will see many companies either completely dropping out of this race, let's call them, or partnering with small and large corporations, forming larger networks in their effort to achieve autonomous mobility.
You know, Evangelos, around the same time, I wrote a book on automation, and I only looked at autonomous, a small piece of it. But like you, I looked at use cases like platooning of trucks on long distance, segments of highway as a promising thing. I looked at some disciplined countries like Singapore as possible. But I said, overall, it's going to take a long time for autonomous cars to become mainstream. And I remember people said, oh, you're full of, my God, so much investments going on. It's going to happen much quicker than you think. So I would agree with your assessment that certain use cases will continue to see a lot of interest.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears. Put on your investor hat. So you obviously, like you say, you've been looking at AI for a long time. Obviously, the recent wave of machine learning and other very unique use cases have seen a lot of investment. Where are we in that hype cycle? Are you more excited about that?
So there's no question that over the past, say, 20 or so years, we have made great strides in artificial intelligence, particularly in statistical AI, with the use of various forms of neural networks. We have benefited in making these strides. We have benefited from advances in computing, but not necessarily from advances in algorithms and new approaches. I speak to a lot of boards of directors of public companies, and it continues to, and to obviously senior management teams, and it continues to surprise me how much they know and they do not know about the whole trajectory of AI. So again, we've made great strides compared to, let's say, the previous AI spring that we had back in the 80s and the early part of the 90s. I think that there is now a realization, which I think is very healthy, that AI systems take a long time to develop. In some cases, just having a lot of data may be sufficient, and then the statistical approaches can take us a long way. But I think that in many cases now, both companies and startups, they realize that you need a lot more in-depth work in order to achieve what you promised. So we have seen, we continue to see a great number of AI based startups coming our way. I would say that we see relatively little innovation in their approaches. We tend to be very selective in terms of what we invest. My hope is that, again, as we reevaluate our way forward post-pandemic, we will see the need for increasing automation in many processes. I mean, so a lot of work has already started, and this need will create a new push for new AI approaches and new AI applications. So I'm very optimistic about what we have already started seeing, but what will come with regards to that. But I also think that we need better perspective of what is possible and what will be necessary to create before some new things become possible.
You know, Evangelos, like you have written multiple books, and every time I say, rather than transcribe my interviews, I have a lady who does a wonderful job transcribing interviews. I go, let me try some machine transcription. And in 10 years, it hasn't improved much. And that is one of the most sophisticated uses of AI, right? And so I tend to be like you. I want to see real life examples, and it's still spotty. I mean, clearly a lot of progress, but still very use case specific again, I would say.
Well, there are problems, again, as I've been saying, there are problems that can be solved very nicely because of the advances we have made in computing and bandwidth and storage and the availability of data. No question about it, okay? But like it happened during the previous AI spring, we need to develop the right filters to say, okay, here's what I can solve well with what I have available to me, whether it is the neural network architectures, the underlying computing capabilities, the availability of data, the availability of domain knowledge, and what I need to develop in order to be able to solve another problem. I mean, we do quite a bit of work with our telco partners around natural language understanding, because they want to further automate their customer support function. And there you see, what you can do with something like a chatbot today, and where the current technology of chatbots hits the wall. So again, these are some of the problems that we need to. That's what I said. We need to develop better filters. We've done great work around vision, right? Something that when I was at school and afterwards, we could never fathom that we would be able to make this kind of advances that we were able to do today, because of the architectures that we can develop, because of the data that is available, et cetera, and so forth. But there are other problems that are less akin to simple pattern recognition and classification. And for those, we need to do a lot more work.
So Evangelos, again, on the investor side, it just seemed like recessions are very tough on startups. But this recession has opened up an amazing amount of opportunities, especially in biotech and health informatics and pandemic modeling. The public health data is going to just be phenomenal for the next few years, right? Is that changing your perspective on investment, or are you going to stick to digital and AI investment?
That we are going to be introducing is going to be a great opportunity for new AI applications. Corporations are rethinking existing processes. They are creating new processes, again, as a result of how their work and how their enterprise environment is being rethought due to the pandemic. And I think as these new ideas are coming forward, there will be great opportunity for startups, for entrepreneurs to come to the help and provide applications. But I also think that as we're doing this, we have to continue realizing, we have to continue accepting that developing these applications beyond the prototype is going to takes significant amount of time. Sometimes we may not have the right data from the beginning. Sometimes we may need to develop larger knowledge bases. Sometimes we need to create the right tooling. But again, I'm very optimistic about the AI opportunities that will arise as a result of the pandemic related thinking.
So, Evangelos, put on your economist hat now. You talk to a number of boards. You're obviously evaluating a lot of investment opportunities. What do you see in the economy? Do you see a sharp recovery, a V recovery? Do you see a gradual U-shaped recovery? Do you see a choppy W? Or do you see a dead L for the next 2-3 years? What would you say?
In the last chapter of my book, I talk about how I see this transportation transformation evolving and proceeding over the next several years. And one of the statements I make is that it is not going to proceed in the same way across the world. And in fact, I described 3 different scenarios for different geographies. So similarly, I don't believe that we will see a similar recovery across the world, even though we would like to, because that's the easiest way to approach it. I think in fact, I would say even further within geographies, we will see different countries develop, recover differently. So I'll give you a recent example. So recently, just a few days ago, news from Japan came out about the Japanese economy, the recession, they're sliding back to recession, and the structural shape of the economy, because of what Japan has been through over the past 20, 30 years, is not going to enable them to have a V or a W shape recovery. China is a different story. Korea, yet a different story. So I think that again, what we do, because we operate in Europe, North America, and Asia, we tend to pay attention, frankly, on a country-by-country basis. I am from my small perch. I'm very carefully paying attention to the so-called second wave, which is coming. I mean, you see it right now, both in certain countries in Asia and in Europe. I think countries have learned lessons, but even with those lessons, I think certain realities are going to be unavoidable. So what I am hoping is that we will not see U-shaped recoveries with a very long bottom, if you will. I think that in many instances, including here in the US, it looks more like a swoosh recovery. I mean, not quite a U, because we don't have a straight up phase. And you see that both from the, I mean, we're paying attention to unemployment filings, we're paying attention to obviously mobility patterns in terms of who is driving and where. We do a lot of analysis. We have data scientists on staff that are looking a lot of using a variety of data, where people go and how they get there. So you're seeing, where operating hours of small businesses. I think we've made progress over the summer, but again, nothing that is indicative of a U shape or a recovery or even a V-shaped recovery. I think it looks much more like a prolonged U with a gradual uptick.
Well, Evangelos, really stimulating conversation. I'm glad you touched on the global recovery being inconsistent, because yes, that is going to be the pattern, right? It was interesting to hear you say Japan may have a more tougher time because of their 20-year sluggishness, if you will. But
yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I am, again, as I said, and many VCs say that recessions and times of crisis are great times to start companies. So we are encouraging entrepreneurs to think of new ideas, and we believe that there is a target-rich environment because of what enterprises are going through. We do a lot of our work these days, both with startups and with large corporations, tends to be Europe and Asia. We continue to see corporations, again, in the three industries that we work with, having a clear view of the future, right? And they're not making very drastic changes to their long horizon projects, be it new mobility related, be it vehicle related, as they pertain to new mobility. And I'm very encouraged, frankly, to see that in a number of the transformations that I describe in the book with regards to these three constituencies, so cities, corporations, and automakers and mobility services companies, they are already starting to be discussed, and little by little will start to be adopted. So I think the book is coming at the right time, even though the amount of transportation has changed and decreased, and sometimes the patterns have changed because of the pandemic.
Well, I interviewed Ray Lane, who's a VC like you, and he made a bold statement. He says, Vinnie, the funds that raise money this year or next year will be the best performing in this decade. And we're just beginning the decade. So he's that optimistic. So thank you again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and look forward to more conversations.
Thank you. Thank you always.